Hello, welcome to Your Play or Mine, the only podcast that combines the worlds of creative arts and sport in one show. I am your host, Sarah Mackenzie Foley, and I am here because I believe that the arts and sport are two of the biggest connectors of the human experience. They bring us together and create moments of incredible emotion in ways that few other things can do in our lives. And I've spent lots and lots of time digging for these nuggets of conversations across other people's interviews. And after a while, those little nuggets just weren't enough. So here I am, bringing you an entire show dedicated to sharing the magic of the connections between the artistic and sporting worlds. This is season 1, episode 1 of the podcast, and I am especially excited to bring this first conversation to you. My first guest is someone who has carved out a career in 3 acts across sport, music, and well-being, representing both Leinster and the Ireland under-21 rugby team before launching a chart-topping band that you may have heard of called the Blizzards. And Act 3 is where we find him now. That's where he has expanded his horizons into the wellness industry, focusing on mental health awareness and well-being, including undertaking a PhD study centred on the Irish mental health system over the last 200 years. So what else would he be doing? So aside from all of that, he's absolutely sound and a real gentleman. So it's an honour to have him on season 1. But without further ado, here is my conversation with Niall Breslin, aka Bressie. Enjoy. Bressie, welcome to Your Play or Mine. It is fantastic to have you on the podcast, and especially as the very first guest. It's a great exciting day for me. So thanks a million for being on.
My pleasure. My pleasure to be here.
In the spirit of sporting terminology, we're going to have probably some puns, I reckon, throughout this conversation. But the first one is, I've got 3 kickoff questions to get us started.
That's
so
not a bad pun. That's all right.
It's not too bad. Sure, it's not.
No, it's all right. That's not dad joke level. We're good.
No, exactly. I'll try and steer away from those. What is your very first sporting memory? If you cast your mind back, what kind of pops up as the first one?
I played every sport. That was probably the first thing to say. I was lucky that my parents were like, just do whatever you want. Maybe it was a bad thing. Maybe they just didn't care about me and just told me to go out and don't come back till God knows when. But I played basketball, which they didn't like that much, soccer, rugby, Gaelic football. And my earliest memory, I think, was actually community games. And community games is actually such an important, especially in a town like Mullingar where I'm from. You'd have certain locations. You'd have where I'm from, Ballinderry, and then you'd go against. It was my first time experiencing that. And I was a runner. I was fast as a kid. And my first kind of experience was winning. I can remember it was winning, like I think it was probably 50 meters or something. But just the feeling of winning felt good. And it felt, as a kid, you really don't know what you're good at. You're really still finding your feet, and you're trying to experience these little moments of I don't know what you call them, but I remember winning, and it wasn't even the winning, it was the congratulations from my family and those around me, but that was the earliest. And then I completely freaked out when they said that we might have to go to Mosney. It's like I didn't want to go to Mosney, but I used to get a nosebleed if I went past Kinnegad in the N4. So I was like, I'm not going. Like Mosney felt like it was like a global trip to, the other side of the world. So yeah, no, but I do remember community games and entering it every year.
Wow, love that. And who is your personal sporting GOAT, your greatest of all time? I know that's tough when you're interested in a lot of sports, but we'll try and narrow it down.
There are a few. I think there's the iconic ones, the ones that they're not human type, where whatever they've achieved is not human. It's supernatural type levels. And I mean, Muhammad Ali would be, if you've ever gone back and watched him and just go away from all the kind of the performative stuff and the funny stuff and the interviews and watch him fight, it is almost like watching. Do you know when you were watching Rocky and you're like, oh, that's not how boxing works. Like nobody gets hit like that much. Nobody like it's completely blown up for Hollywood. It is kind of like that. Just the pace, the speed, the agility, the charisma, the power. It is phenomenal to watch. If you've ever got a chance, go back and watch. Even if you're not into boxing, it is an incredible thing. I have a lot of respect, and I hope this doesn't date, but I have a lot of respect for Rory McIlroy as
Yeah.
well. And I think how he stood his ground. Now, this is going to go out and he's going to sign up to live or something. I know that's going to happen, and I'm going to be
Oh,
eating my
please
words.
no, don't
So
do it,
keep
Rory.
that in. So keep that in. The caveat is if he sticks to those morals, because it's very hard when people are putting €1 billion in front of you. But the way I look at it, the likes of Rory McIlroy doesn't need €1 billion. You know, he just doesn't. And I think so far I'm very respectful of how he's held himself in what must be an immensely difficult situation where his peers and his friends are, you know, you can judge them all you want, are taking the money. Some I understand some of the people who mightn't be making the type of living that they'd expect from the sacrifices they put in. But I do find it difficult to see the John Rams going and the people who have bank balances of well over 200-300 million. You know, how much do you need? That type of stuff. But I hope Rory sticks to his guns. I've respected him. I think he's, to me, it's a pity. Rory, Tiger Woods is still, you know, will always be seen as the greatest ever golfer, I think.
Yeah.
And I think Rory is fairly close behind him.
And what would you say is the most emotional sporting moment you've ever experienced? It could be as a spectator or, you know, in your own playing career, whichever you prefer.
Actually, I suppose you can say the ones that were really emotional, the kind of obvious emotional ones, but there was one that really got me, and I don't know why, was when Darren Clark was in the Ryder Cup and his wife had just died the week before, and he made the putt and he just fell apart. I remember we were watching the pub in Mullingar and there was just 200 bawling men just watching it in the golf club, and it was a very, you know, I think it was very human, and to watch how the Americans kind of held them, and you know, everything became irrelevant in that moment. Like golf was irrelevant, the Ryder Cup was irrelevant, all of that was irrelevant, and it brought back the humanity of it. I just thought it was a very powerful moment. In my own emotional, the most emotional moment I've had, I suppose, in my sporting career, I don't know how you can call it a career really, I was fairly short, but when I finished my first Ironman, I remember in Copenhagen, a lot had come before that. It wasn't an Ironman for me. It was something entirely different. It was an entirely different letting go of the past in many ways. And my mother was at the end, and I just because probably fatigue, emotion, sacrifice, everything went into it, I literally bawled for about 20 minutes, to the point where she actually said, "Come on now, come on. You're getting dehydrated here."
We said that's enough.
And I was right at the end line, and there's kind of people trying to pass me, and I was like, there was nothing in me anymore. I was so exhausted, and I kind of felt like, you know, right back to those moments of being a baby when your mother was holding you. You know, that's kind of what it kind of felt like, big 6'6" baby.
Yeah, I suppose you just push yourself to that point where I guess you circle back to, I suppose, the essence of what you're left with at the end of that. As you say, physically you're completely spent, but it's the emotional side of it that's still waiting to be, I suppose, released, really, because you've been holding it in with the view to achieving this big physical goal. That makes total sense.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with sport that I think is important, like I love sport at every level. I don't like the over analytical idea of sport. I think sport science is truly important. It has progressed sport. It's allowed humans to be able to push themselves to the absolute limit. But there's part of sport that you can't measure, and you shouldn't. And I think this kind of pursuit and trying to measure every detail of sport is ruining it, to be honest. There's a part of it you just can't measure. There's a dog in people that you can't measure, and you can put all the feckin' monitors and you can do all the tests. It doesn't matter. There is something in people that, you know, no matter what you do, and you can call it the spirit, you can call it whatever you want, but that's what makes sport amazing for me. That's the part of sport I love.
Totally. That's the most human part, I guess, isn't it? That's where the essence comes out. I think it's interesting that, you know, these kind of careers, whether it be in the arts or in sport, it's sort of something that people often pursue because it's a dream. And sometimes I think dreams can lead us to situations both physically and mentally where actually maybe it's not that healthy for us, even though it might seem like it's the only thing you want in the world. And I really loved the conversation that you had with Fabrice Gauthier on Where Is My Mind? And the two of you spoke about, you know, you connected the mind, the body, and soul as a unit rather than entities that can be kind of healed separately. But
Mm-hmm.
you've also spoken before about figuring out how to differentiate between when you're being driven by stamina that you actually have in you and resilience, or whether you're pushing it too far.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything, you know, about when you switched, I suppose, to music as a career that you found healing for you holistically after being in sporting scenarios where physically you'd been so battered over the years?
I think it's important to point out when I look back at the reasons why I had to retire from professional rugby, and they couldn't understand, they couldn't find the injury. They didn't know why I kept tearing muscles. They didn't know why I kept getting injured. And I had ruptured quads, hamstrings, groins, hernias. It was really just my body was broken, and it wasn't my knees or ankles. It was muscles, which is really strange, and my nervous system. When you look back on it, it was because I was so depressed, and my body was so hypervigilant. It was so uh, tired and exhausted internally. It just didn't know how to deal with that, and it was tight all the time. There was no release. So my central nervous system was in what they call the sympathetic nervous response all the time. And not once was that put on the table that might be the reason that I'm getting injured all the time. And now when you look at injuries in elite athletes, the first thing I will look at if there's a chronic injury there is what's going on in their lives, what's happening in their lives, what stressors are happening, how are their relationships. And, you know, if you see that in an athlete, then you find someone to help them through all of that and support them through that. I teach mindfulness with athletes, which isn't going to solve all problems, but it will certainly give you a function of how to deal with that stress and overwhelm. But what mindfulness does is it starts to develop the relationship between the body and the mind. So you can feel that tightness. You can almost sense it in yourself, and you can see what it feels like to let it go. And that's ultimately what we would do. But when your mind is under pressure, when your internal life and environment is overwhelmed, the impact it has on your body is gargantuan, massive. And it's the first thing that athletes should be looking at if they're finding their sleep, their stress levels, their cortisol levels, you know, their relationships, their psychology. And I'm not talking about confidence, and I'm not talking about all the stuff you might see in sports psychology. I'm talking about the stuff like, how are you getting on with your partner? Do you have a life outside of this? You know, what happened when you were younger? Like, was there something there? How do you deal with the inevitability of failure? How do you, maybe somebody doesn't deal with it very well because they were raised by a parent that was cold and told them that they'll never amount to anything. And all this stuff feeds into your life experience. And it did with me. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but this is what we got to look at with athletes. When you look at GAA players, for example, what the ask of GAA players is just too much. It's I work a bit with Westmeath. Their schedule is just too much. And on top of working and everything else, they're breaking down. So when I brought that into music, what I started to think about music was the stress and overwhelm of, so whereas being an athlete, your worth was what you did in the pitch, but as a musician, your worth is what you put out. It was your creative output. And that could be ripped apart, or it could be celebrated, or it could be ignored, it could be rejected. And these are all the things you have to, if you don't want any of that stuff, don't sign up for being a musician. It is part of it. And what you start to realize is how your body and mind react to that. Things like rejection. What happens? I was rejected in sport. I failed in sport many times. I succeeded many times. And it's the same response in sport and music. And the same responses, you have the initial heartbreak, the initial feeling of just feeling lost. And I always say to anyone, let that happen. Experience it. Don't try to push it away. Don't try to avoid it. Let it happen. It's miserable shit, but it never lasts. And then you reflect. Never make a decision in those moments. Then you reflect maybe a week later and go, right, didn't enjoy that. How do I put things in place that doesn't happen again? Or how do I just not care? And that is the biggest tool you can teach somebody in a world where they've so much access to them. It's not how to not give a shit about the
Yeah.
world. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I just mean, I think we get over focused on what other people think all the time.
Completely. And you kind of mentioned it there, but there is an inherent level of exposure involved in both of those careers. And again, it's like the difficult scenario of where your passion is putting you in a position where you are exposed to public opinion, whether it's, as you say, on the pitch or what you're putting out. It's not necessarily something you sign up for, but I think particularly these days, it's part of the deal, really. And
it is, yeah, I get, yeah, it is. And I'm sorry for jumping, because you just
yeah,
reminded me of the after Ireland lost against England and at the Six Nations. Now, this is a team that has won how many games out of the last 25? This is potentially one of the greatest ever sporting teams to exist in this country. And they're going to lose. They lose. The All Blacks lost in their heyday. The All Blacks lost. And there was abuse. And the abuse, on one hand, people were emotional. They were emotive. They were angry. We should have beaten England. I was. And there's a difference between being emotive and being abusive. And
100%, yeah.
Anyone who abuses athletes, anybody, and excuse my language here, knows fucking nothing about sport. Nothing.
Agreed.
Not a single idea of what it takes to sacrifice to get to that point in their life. And not a single part of it should be listened to. If it's abuse, if it's constructive. Like, I put up a post saying I really don't think Ireland should be kicking, as they don't need to kick. They're a world-class attacking team.
Yeah.
I understand the tactic of kicking, but that's the old Ireland. I don't enjoy it. That was the Joe Schmidt era. And that's all I said. And that's constructive.
Yeah.
And there's a difference in that. But, I think some of the abuse you see in those, and then what GAA players put up with. Anyone abusing GAA players when they have any idea what they put on the line to be inter-county footballers or hurlers or whatever, it is huge, the sacrifice they put on. And we can be constructive. I mean, go, listen, I think you're better than that. I think there's more in you. That type of stuff. And I think we have to be very careful what we do. And it isn't part of your job to be abused. It isn't. No one's job is to be abused.
Completely. And I think it's interesting you mentioned the GA players. I listened to an interview last weekend with one of the senior Cork hurlers, and he was asked, you've been going through a tough time, like, how do you deal with the public scrutiny? And his response was, well, I'm lucky enough that I don't actually live in Cork, I live in Limerick. And that felt like a very sad reaction, that it was like relief that he didn't have to be around his, the people of his county, because he said that other guys on the team were experiencing in person that level of, oh, you were rubbish at the weekend. And as you say, these are people that, those of us who aren't involved, we really can't understand the level of commitment. And it's, as you say, it's never right to be kind of leveling that abuse. I think in particular, we see a lot of young athletes also face it. And I know that you're really passionate about catching young people at a crucial age where their, as you said, their mental health and their mental awareness, we could actually open it up much earlier and potentially solve a lot of long-term problems, or at least provide support. And I suppose comparison culture, particularly online now, I think it's preventing a lot of young people from finishing things, from even trying things for fear of failure. How do we try and prevent that? How do we systematically, what's your dream idea of how we could go against that trend it's very much happening at the moment?
Well, the first thing I'll say, if there's young people listening to this, or even specifically young athletes, stop listening to the hustler mentality, the mindsets, the bullshit you see on TikTok, the guys who go to the gym twice before 6 a.m. and get a day's work. It's nonsense. It's all nonsense. It is so bad. It is the best athletes, the most successful athletes, the most successful people I know creatively, in business, they understand the true importance of rest. Total rest. Now, I'm not talking sitting on your arse and looking at your phone. I mean spiritual rest. I mean physical rest, mental rest, where you owe the world nothing. And you should not feel guilty about taking big lumps of your week, like a day or 6 hours in it, or parts of your day even, just to do that. Stop buying into this shit. It is horseshit. It is built around an algorithm. It is nonsense. That does not mean the most successful people I know have figured that out. They were like, I'm not buying into that. That's nonsense. That's not how the human condition works, and it's not sustainable. And if that is all you do in life, where's the life? Where do you live it? Like, if you're always chasing dreams and cars and shit, where do you live? Like, what is the point? Like, this is the stuff. And in sport, this is particularly important, because you will feel, no matter what sport you do, that when you sit to rest, when you sit to actually let the body heal, you will feel uncomfortable, you will feel anxious, you will feel guilty, and you will judge yourself. Sit with all of that, because if you want to be successful, whether it's GAA or rugby, I don't care, you got to figure that one out. And nobody teaches that. You won't get a coach teaching you that. That is something you got to get really comfortable in your own body, in your own skin, and sit with it. And this is coming from somebody who couldn't sit still 20 years ago. I would get itchy. But you need to figure that out. Please don't believe success is about driving yourself every minute of the day. It is not. It is not that. And yes, some people might do it, but it is not normal, and it is not sustainable, and it is not the secret to success. It just isn't. And as I said, I've worked with immensely successful people. And the other thing I will say, especially to young men, is you can be powerful and strong and vulnerable at the same time. They're not exclusive. Yeah. And remember that. And a great role model in that regard is Andrew Porter. Like,
that's very true.
Can't walk into a room with him. He's that big and strong and powerful and demanding. Yet he'll tell you about what it felt like to lose his mother when he was 13, and how he was utterly lost for years, and how he still goes through moments of unable to deal with that, and where he breaks down. And that is, to me, a crucially important message for young men who are in sport, and young women. But we know there's a fundamental issue with young men and their mental health in terms of the suicide rates we're seeing and the issues we're seeing. So this is something we got to talk about.
Completely. And I think it scares me to see, Marcus Rashford is someone that comes to mind, where I think this is part of the systems that are in place with football now at the highest level, where, people are taken in from the age of 7, 8 years old, and they're told, you're the next, whoever, you're the next, like Roy Keane, you're the next Ronaldo. And how can you put that mental strain on a child, and then you see him come up, and you see him initially be really successful, now going through a challenging period, kind of coming out of it again. And he was berated. He was told that he'd lost all his skill, that he had nothing left, like that mentally he wasn't up to it. It's, you have to hope that people, if they don't have, as you say, those skills within themselves to deal with that at least they have some kind of support system until it is built into the systems that they're living in. Because at the moment, it is all driven by results, which in sport is understandable, but you have to think about the human cost as well of what is happening there.
I think the message I see a lot about Rashford, and when, the good, the bad, and the ugly that is inevitable in professional sport, is people equate happiness, success with money. And they'll say things like, but sure, like, people say, we need to stop abusing this young man. And they go, well, she's minted. And for some reason, that creates a force field around this guy, just because he might be financially secure and very wealthy because of his craft and talent, that we feel, oh, well, we did the same with Caroline Flack. There was that same idea, she's famous, so she's well able for this. Stop it. Stop with that nonsense, guys. Come on now. It doesn't equate. And I see this because, as I say, I do speak with athletes a lot. A lot of them reach out to me about certain things that they're going through, and I get them the right supports and stuff and the right help with the people I know who are world class at that type of thing. But anybody who once again jumps on TikTok or Instagram and just has this belief that because this person has, success and money, that they can it's open season on them, they need to locate their souls. They really do. And they need to have a good word with them, because it just doesn't work like that. And actually, funny enough, some of the happiest people I've ever met in my life had very little. They're just content in their life, and stop equating. And that's the other thing we equate money and success and cars with happiness. It's the most miserable people I've met are people who've been blindingly believed that that was the only thing that would make them happy. And believe it or not, and I can't speak for everybody when I say that stuff, but a lot of people, it doesn't. Because what I believe makes you happy or makes you feel content is connection with other people. That's where my 25 years of experience of trying to figure out my own chaos, that's where my happiness is good people. That's it. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. I think you mentioned it earlier, but I think fear of failure is definitely a big thing. And I think it's, again, when you're young, like I'm thinking even about my own career path, let's say, I think about the fact that if someone had told me when I was younger that you can choose one thing now and it's okay if later on you choose something else, I think I would love to see that come in at a younger age. I think if you told me that when I was filling in my CAO or whatever, it would have blown my mind. I would have been, because what I did in the end is I chose a third path actually that I thought was kind of more, this will give me general skills and maybe I will come back to those things that I'm passionate about later on. And I am, but I think that's also, it's another piece where at that really vulnerable age where you're being told you need to make a decision and that feels very big that you don't really feel equipped to make, just saying that, you can pivot. And I think it wasn't the case before, but I think luckily now it is. You can make those changes later on. And as you said, you can go on this longer journey. It's not, life isn't like a timeline of milestones that are all laddering up to this one thing. But I think, unfortunately, that is what we tell teenagers in particular.
Well, I can only speak from my own position. Like you look at the career path I went on, I still can't tell you what I do. I still can't give you a definition of what my career is. I'm back and do my PhD. I went from hating school and being called stupid all my life to a scholarship in Trinity doing a PhD, because I wasn't stupid. I just didn't like what I was being taught. And I wanted to question things. I was so interested in everything. And that gets literally beaten out of you in school, like where you're not meant to think for yourself. And that's just a prime example. I always wanted to be somebody who explores knowledge. That's the thing I find most interesting. But I went, before I got to the point where I'm sitting doing a PhD, I was a professional athlete. I was a GA player. I was a musician. I did TV. I wrote books. I was, documentary maker. I worked in a bank for 10 minutes. I did all of this stuff. And I've gone full circle. And maybe in 2 years' time, I'll be doing something different. But the one thing we need to be careful with is we can't dictate the path of young people. We can't, as parents or as adults or as society, tell young people what path they should be taking. Because when I was in college or I was in school, everyone said you should be working in banks. That didn't work out. The fucking things went belly up literally the year I finished college. So, and then back in the 80s, everyone wanted to be a priest. Like, think about it. There will always be people telling you what you should or should not be. I was told in school every single day that music was a waste of my time, and you're wasting your time. Music is just a hobby. They also said the same thing to somebody who went to my school, Niall Horn. So this is the point. You have no right to dictate the path of a young person. Let them find it, and they mightn't find it straight away, but let them honor the passion they have. Because I think the one thing I feel, if young people are passionate about what they're doing, they blow you away with it. They're unbelievable what they can achieve. But like, if you try to make them passionate about something they have no passion about, because it's what society's telling them they should do, they'll resent it. and they'll spend 20 years going, what am I doing? And that's the thing I always say to people, is just feckin'. And then, you know, you throw in the middle of all that responsibility, and you might end up having a family or a loved one, and then you have to go, right, okay, lads, the honeymoon period's over. I have to get like that's what happened with the Blizzards. A lot of lads had kids, and we weren't really making money. And the lads were like, we got to go get real jobs because we have to provide for our children.
Yeah.
And then everything changes. But that's life. The one thing I'll say, the most important message to young people: life is not a straight line. I'm telling you that. If you and the more you expect it to be, the more angry, frustrated, and pissed off you'll get. Just don't expect it to be a straight line.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the Blizzards there. I'm really curious about, I'm thinking about communication kind of in a sporting environment and in a creative environment. Obviously, if you're on a team, let's say, for example, there's a lot of goal setting constantly happening. It can be very focused on advice and scrutiny with the aim of achieving results. I'd imagine that's very different in a creative environment, because what you want is really to give people space to express and create. And it's more about kind of trust and intuition within the group. Do you think that's like a fair description based on your experience, or is there anything you'd kind of
But
add to that?
that's what sport should be. That is what sport should be. Like you there has to be a certain level where your coach is giving your team tactics. There's a game plan. There's a style of play that you honor, that you respect. But there is a part of sports that you cannot operate through fear. And I'll give you an example. Like, I remember playing for Leinster, and I was playing blindside flanker, and we played against Glasgow, and their number 8 danced past me down the blindside for a try, which is just a no-no. That's the one. My only job is to stop people scoring tries in the blindside of a scrum. And for the whole 25 minutes after that, I was thinking about the video session we're going to have on Monday and the abuse I'm going to get at that.
Yeah.
And then what happened 25 minutes later? The exact same thing. Because I couldn't get back into my body. I was analyzing it. And what I'm saying was, I felt fearful. I felt scared. You cannot play sport scared. And a great example of watching athletes not play scared is maybe the Japanese rugby team at the World Cup, or the Italian rugby team in the Six Nations. There was the kind of, what I think happened to Italy, I could be wrong here, is I'd say their coach just said, take the shackles off, just play, just don't think about it, just play, enjoy it. I think there's just a certain level of sport where you've got to let that intuition kick in, that natural ability, that natural talent and skill and power. And that's when I think you see things like flow state. That's when you see, but when you put fear into all of it, and you tell players, like, if you drop a ball, we're going to fine you, and all this nonsense that you see at elite level sport, it doesn't work. I'd actually argue, show me any team where that's worked. And somebody's going to probably find a team. But like, when I look at the great teams that I love, like the Dublins, there's a standard, and you keep that standard, and you don't drop that standard. I look at Limerick hurling. I would imagine John Kiley doesn't operate through fear. And you might have fear being dropped and stuff because he didn't play well. But not fear because he tried something that didn't come off. So I think there's a lot that creativity can teach athletes. And there's a lot of that they should hear. And I think a lot of them do hear it now, that to play, what I say to some of the footballers I work with, go back to the rawness that got you into this in the first place.
Yeah.
Stop overthinking it. That first time you picked up a football, that first time you talked about the first earliest memory, that first time you did something on a Gaelic pitch that made you, oh my God, I love this game. The first time you felt part of a team. Tap into that rawness, and it's unbeatable. But like the one thing that happens in music is, you start out as a garage band, and everything's great, and you're doing your gigs, everything feels amazing, there's a buzz, shows are amazing, then you start making music amazing, and then a label might come on board, and then you start worried about radio, and then you start worried about the label and what they think, and then you start worried about what other people think, and all of a sudden that rawness is gone, and you're questioning everything you do, and you're questioning everything you put out, and you're trying to fit in to other people's perceptions of what you wanted to be, and then the joy goes out of it. And I think that happens in sport. So try and hold on to that. If you've lost that rawness, try and regain it. Try and find it again.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask a closing question that's like, what rule, ritual, regulation would you bring in between sport and music that you think would translate? But I think we've covered probably 10 or 15 of those, I think, in the conversation, which is great. But before I let you go, I do want to mention that you've got a live show of the Where Is Your Mind podcast coming up in Cork in the Opera House on Sunday, the 21st of April, with a special guest. So do you want to just maybe tell us a bit about the show and what people can expect?
Yeah, it's everything you think it's going to be. It isn't. When we talk about a show like Where's My Mind, people go, "Oh my God, it's going to be all heavy and stuff. It's going to be all about mental health." And, like, it's so funny. You see all these like lads who've been dragged there by their partners, kind of going, "What's this shit?" And then after 10 minutes, like, "It's all right." It's a kind of a funny, irreverent, humorous look at the state of my mind and the stuff that I did, and also the tragic stuff, the difficult stuff. But it's told in a way that's accessible, and it's told through music, spoken word, monologues, and then we've amazing guests. Trisha Transformation, my guest. It's quite a experience that most people don't expect. And the Cork Opera House is ideal for it. It's an ideal venue, as there's a lot of piano playing and music and moments like that in it. But yeah, I've never played the Cork Opera House in all my
It's first time.
20 odd years of being a musician. I've never had the luxury of playing it, and it's one of the, along with places like the Olympia and like the Opera House in Wexford, it's one of the iconic places that you want to play. So I can't wait to get down.
Brilliant. Well, there are still limited tickets available for the show as of us recording today, so get yourselves over to the Opera House website to grab them before they're gone. Bressie, thank you so much for being on today and for sharing everything that you have in the course of our chat. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.